Hello and welcome to the latest deep dive session on the VCF, that is your VMware Cloud Foundation. I am Sachin Alex from the product marketing team. I'm joined by my colleagues Soumya Kapoor and Kelcey from the VCF product division. We also have Kruti and Anuradha who will be helping us out with the Q&A. So in today's session, we will focus on how you can make the most of your VCF investments using smarter cost decision making. Next slide, please. We know that cloud investments are on the rise, but organizations are looking for tighter controls over these cloud costs, as well as better returns on their investments. So, to achieve this, there is a growing need to improve cost transparency between the cloud providers and the cloud consumers. So, when I say providers, I am referring to the infrastructure team that is building the cloud and providing the resources to the platform or the application team who are the primary consumers of this infrastructure. So, when readying the infrastructure, providers deal with a lot of direct and indirect costs, which at times may not be clear. So, providers need to be aware of the implications of adding new hosts, moving workloads around, and in order to maintain efficient operations, this visibility is very needed. So, consumers, on the other hand, they are looking to drive responsible consumption. They need to be aware of costs involved for various resources that they consume and seek resource consumption reports. So this is where VCF actually comes in. Next slide, please. So what VCF does is it provides a deep visibility into the costs associated with your compute, storage, and network layers. It keeps track of your licensing and support costs. You can plan your future projects and workloads as well. So overall, it provides the optimization recommendations as well, which can help you save costs. And in general, like there is a better ROI for your VCF investments. Now, Soumya will talk more about these VCF cost management capabilities.
Thank you, Sachin. So, starting with VCF cost management capabilities, I'll first talk through what are the key pillars of cost management or FinOps. One is cost visibility, the thing that you see on screen right now. And then we'll also talk about optimization and planning capabilities that are there in Infra FinOps. So to start with cost visibility, what is it that a customer, to start with provider, needs in their FinOps capabilities? First is TCO, or total cost of ownership, which basically means how much is it that my infrastructure costs to run, which is something they see on the screen immediately as they land on the cost page. But if they look at the TCO and say that, hey, this doesn't seem right, they can go into something called as cost drivers, which is nothing but their expense management of server hardware expenses that they have incurred, or licenses, or storage, or facilities, etc., etc. So once they go and edit their cost drivers, they can come back and see the TCO and say, hey, this seems right now. And once their TCO is visible, they also want to be able to hold the users or the teams or organizations or regions, business units accountable for that cost. And there comes the showback reports or showback dashboards, which basically is a way to hold the users accountable and send them a report saying that this is how much we have paid for your infrastructure, so that you're more responsible in using the resources going forward. Then there are certain customers who might come and say, hey, I have my own finance model. True cost is fine, but I need to use that finance model to charge my users or customers back. It could mean that they follow something called as infrastructure as a service model as an enterprise, or they could plainly be service providers who are spending on the infrastructure, but they're selling that infrastructure for some profit. So they define the rate cards as IT admins, and then they generate chargeback reports and billing against the infrastructure that the users or the consumers are consuming. Those bills can today be seen generated in VCF Ops and also be seen in VCFA by the consumers as well. Beyond this, the customers, once they are done looking at the TCO, they also want to be able to analyze the cost in different ways. For example, uh, can you tell me why the cost is high? Can you tell me the top 10 VMs within this cluster that are costing the most? Or can you compare business unit A, B, C against each other and tell me which are the highest infra cost business units? Or can you tell me which organizations can help me achieve the most infra savings through different optimization measures? All of that you can do using cost analysis. And now, once you're done using cost analysis, the next thing that you do is cost optimization. Because the cost is still high, what you want to do is reduce cost going forward, or at least do not pay as much going forward. That's where potential savings come into picture, which basically means that I have spent a lot on the infrastructure, but I want to go back and see if there is any wastage. And the wastage could be through idle VMs, powered off VMs, snapshots, orphan disks. These are all reclaimable resources, or purely because you have not allocated the correct size of VMs. There are a lot of oversized VMs which you can right size and use that capacity for future workloads. So that is available and is called as potential savings. And once you achieve those potential savings, we also help you see as to how much have you actually accomplished using certain actions of reclamation or right sizing, and that is called as realized saving. So cost optimization in this case comes full circle and actually tells you, hey, you use certain recommendations and saved slight bit of money for in the future. So you don't have to buy a server or two servers for the that you would have otherwise. So there is something called as reclaimable hosts that shows you that kind of a data. Then there is cost planning. So cost planning is basically for customers who want to come and ask, hey, you know what, I am deploying certain workloads and I want to know whether that workload will fit my cluster or not and how much will it cost. Likewise, there is infrastructure planning saying that, hey, I want to add a new host. Will it fit my data center and how much will it cost? But it doesn't end there. Customers also have a capability to be able to uh, assess the workloads that they're adding against public clouds. For example, if I'm adding a workload of a certain configuration, I can see how much will it cost in a particular cluster within VCF versus how much will a comparable workload cost on AWS or GCP or Azure, and immediately see that, hey, this is a better decision for me or something else is a better decision for me, and accordingly make an informed decision. There is something else that is called as budget planning. So customers always have an ability to create custom dashboards wherein they can set budgets that, okay, for every organization, I have a certain amount of budget. And whenever that organization or any construct that they might be using is about to exceed the budget or exceeds the budget, they can set up alerts and get those alerts against those budget breaches, so that they are, apart from being held accountable through reports and dashboards, they always have alerts that are keeping them responsible and honest. So these are the key pillars of cost management. Now we'll quickly go through some slides that talk about the capabilities through certain screenshots, after which we'll move on to the demo. First one is, of course, total cost of ownership or cost overview, as we spoke about. So here on the screen, what you see is the cost overview page, wherein all the VCF wide infrastructure is shown in terms of TCO. So you see this total cost of ownership distributed by capacity, cost drivers, and VCF domains. Then you can see how much can you save via idle VMs, orphan disks, oversized VMs, and so on and so forth. And then per VCF domain, how much saving is possible. After this, what you don't see in the screenshot is realized savings as to how much have you saved month to date through the recommendations that we have been giving you. Then, of course, there is cost drivers that helps you track all the expenses of infrastructure, starting with server hardware, storage, licenses, applications maintenance, labor, facilities, network, etc. There is also something called as additional cost, which is basically for the customers to say that, okay, all these cost drivers are fine, but basis certain tags or basis certain, or for some special IDs of hosts, I have paid certain extra amount for some service that you don't know of or that is not very common. We allow them to track that expense as well, and it is ultimately added to the total cost of ownership. Then there is cost analysis. Now, before we move on to cost analysis, basically the entire TCO is distributed across VMs, even to the level of CPU memory storage, using our patented cost algorithm that basically helps us arrive at VM level cost. And that is then distributed across hosts, clusters, and other constructs that you may have. Now, once the VM level cost is available, it's very easy to slice and dice that data, but you have to do it one by one through different inventory pages. Otherwise, if you didn't have cost analysis. Now, with cost analysis being there, all you can say is, hey, this is my analysis. I want to assess the total cost of top 10 virtual machines within a particular scope. Either the scope can be across your VCF instance, or you can say within this data center, it will give you the top 10 VMs and the total cost of ownership for them in a tabular view, or you can also see a graphical view if you want to look at that. You can export it, you can send it across to people. This is a pure, you know, top 10 or top n assessment of virtual machines, but you can do it for organizations. You can also do it for custom groups if you're not happy with the kind of constructs that are already available. You can also compare different custom groups or different organizations or business applications against each other using cost analysis. Then there is budget management. So budget management is basically a capability that you can self-serve yourself with. So basically you come up with a dashboard, say this is the budget for whatever construct you want to follow. For example, organization. So per organization, I have so much, so much, so much budget, and you set up alerts saying that whenever this budget is breached, I want an alert. You'll be able to get those alerts and keep people responsible. You can also track burn down against that budget, saying that month to date, so much is spent, and so much amount is what I can spend further within this organization or within this business unit or whatever construct the customers might be using. Then there is, of course, cost optimization. So there is an optimization overview which shows you what is your TCO, how much can you save in percentage. Here you can see up to 43% of potential savings possible in the instance that we're looking at. Then so much is what you have realized, so much more scope is there in terms of dollar value. And looking at the other elements of this page, that okay, potential savings overall, then through right sizing you can save so much, through reclamation you can save so much, through, and in realized savings you can actually see how much has been saved. So all those capabilities are available within the cost optimization section of the cost page. Now there is something called as return on investment, which at the end of all FinOps capabilities you want to be able to showcase. That is basically, once you have VCF available, what are you really getting out of it? So one is, once you have integrated stack, you're not having to pay for any add-on capabilities which you might have to in other cases if you're buying individual products, or if you're buying a kind of license that requires you to buy a lot of add-ons. So that is something you don't have to do in case of VCF. VCF comes with a bundle of many, many capabilities and services that you get within the stack. Then there is automation and operations. Automation and operations come within VCF itself, which basically means that your entire provisioning, patching, updates, name creation, and all of that management is available within VCF. And not just that, all the operations capabilities are available alongside as well. And by operations capabilities, we mean There is logs, there's diagnostics, there is availability, performance, cost, capacity, compliance, all those capabilities available as well. Then there is cost optimization that I just showed. So within VCF itself, we help you see that, hey, this is how much you've spent, but if there is any wastage, we'll also help you save that. Then you can also do a cost comparison against other clouds or external systems. Say that, there is a workload that I'm trying to add, and in an AWS or GCP or any other clouds, this is how much it would have cost if I were to deploy a comparable workload. You and whatever amount you're saving across all these using all these capabilities, you can actually reinvest that in innovation. So your resources are freed up through cost optimization, and you're saving a lot by deploying integrated stack and using automation and operations within VCF itself to be able to do other things like setting a scalable foundation for traditional modern and AI workloads going forward. So that's something you can do. Uh, Going forward, after cost visibility, we of course have showback. So showback, as you see here in cost page, allows you to see the cost for all the organizations, projects, VMs, containers, and we continue to add more things here. So you see the organizations, all the cost uh, is available here. Within that organization, the region quotas, within those region quotas, the namespaces, and so on and so forth. You have cost available for all of them. So organizations and projects again coming from VCFA. But if there is no VCFA, you will still be able to see the cost of VMs and containers within the system itself. Then coming to pricing policy or rate cards, this is basically again for either service providers or customers following infrastructure as a service model, wherein they go into rate cards and say, hey, this is how much I want to charge for compute, storage, network, or any additional tags, or one-time fixed cost for, say, for example, VM setup, or rate factors basis that, basis so and so condition, I want to bump up the storage cost. So, for example, if there is some backup enabled, I want to bump up the storage cost. So, those things are possible using pricing policy. And once the pricing policy is configured, assigned, and so on and so forth, customers can do a chargeback. So IT admins typically use pricing policies to do a chargeback. They can see the chargeback dashboard within Ops itself. A similar view is available for consumers to consume in VCFA as well. And based off of this, the pricing metrics or chargeback, there are bills that are also generated by service providers that can be consumed by the consumers as well. So that is chargeback, and of course the billing capabilities that we spoke about. Now, moving on, we have cost planning, like I spoke about. So cost planning starts with the infrastructure planning. Like I said, if there are new projects coming in, I need new hosts. Will they fit my data center or not? How much will they cost? There is infrastructure planning. Then there is workload planning. That means that there are new people coming in. I need new machines, new virtual machines. Will they fit my cluster or not? And how much will they cost? And then, of course, I'm thinking about migration, or I'm trying to compare with other cloud service providers. Can I see as to how much my workload will cost here on VCF versus any other platforms or cloud providers? So that is something I can see. You can see the workload planning being done here. A configuration was added, and you can see this is how much it'll cost to run that VM for a month. Then there is infrastructure planning. You can see that after adding the host, this is the total cost of that host. And then there is migration planning. So migration planning, you can see that within this cluster, if I tried to add a particular VM, it costs so much, $239 on VCF versus this is how much it costs on AWS, IBM, or Microsoft Azure. And the workload configuration is listed here, saying that this is the configuration we're using for VCF, and these are the comparable configurations that we're using for the other clouds as well. So that is there for FinOps capabilities in general. And what we've basically learned is we offer comprehensive cost visibility and analysis across your VCF stack through different capabilities like TCO, cost drivers, show, and cost analysis. Then there is, of course, planning and budget management through what if analysis and dashboard capabilities. And we also help you see benefits in ROI through optimization capabilities via the right sizing and reclamation features that Ops has. And then, of course, show back and charge back is possible via the VM metrics that we generate through our patented cost algorithm. And then it can be distributed across whatever your management constructed is, basically organizations, projects, users, or business units, and so on and so forth. So that is what we have in FinOps or cost management. I will stop here and hand it over to Kelsey for the demo.
All righty. So with that, thanks, Soumya. Hello everyone. I'm Kelcey Lemon. I am a senior technical marketing manager for the VCF division here at Broadcom. And one of the things that I like to do, when I like to demonstrate VCF's, cost and pricing capabilities, I like to sort of show them in the context of these three phases here, right? Going from gaining an initial understanding of your cost to planning and budgeting for future projects to ultimately, just running your IT like a business, right? And so I really like this flow because regardless of where you are in the process of adopting, cost management best practices, VMware Cloud Foundation can actually help you at every step. And so with that, right, let's just take a look at how VCF can actually help you understand and manage your costs, right? And so, as Sachin and Soumya, mentioned, you can take advantage of VCF's, total cost of ownership feature that actually helps you get that initial understanding of your overall cost, right? And again, as Sachin and Soumya mentioned, after reviewing your total cost of ownership, you may notice that certain expenses don't quite line up, right? Prompting that question, can I adjust these costs? And with VMware Cloud Foundation, and especially that cost driver feature, the answer is yes. And that actually leads to the final feature in this sort of first stage, if you will, after you've gotten a handle on the things that you can immediately control. You may say to yourself, that the VMs in that line of business or that department, they're very high. How can I inform that team about these costs and make them more accountable, right? And this is where the showback feature again comes into play. And so with that, let's just take a look at a workflow that actually leverages all three of these features in action. And so, the total cost of ownership encompasses, all those costs, to owning and operating your infrastructure throughout its life cycle. You get a summary of your total cost of ownership on VCF's homepage. And for a more detailed breakdown, just click View Costs. And the total cost of ownership provides TCO for your details about your cloud types, your setup. You can select the cloud type and you can view its associated costs. You get the option to see it on the daily or weekly, and even your month-to-date costs as well. And you can also see the total cost of ownership based off capacity, cost drivers, and even data centers that exist in your setup. And again, you can view, the details of your potential savings across multiple reclaimable or right-sizing resources in your individual data centers. And you can also get details, as you can see here, on the realized savings that takes place after you've taken action against those potential saving recommendations. And so with this, this page is a great sort of first step to understanding your costs and really sort of forming that game plan to minimize your costs, right? And so, and if your TCO figures aren't right, you can actually adjust them on the cost drivers page, right? Here you're going to see a list of all of VCF supported cost drivers, including your hardware, your storage, and your networking costs. And so let's just edit the cost of our server hardware cost driver. And, I can make edits, globally, or I can update my hardware costs individually. And after I make the edits, right, VCF will actually recalculate my total monthly expense. And, since we're on the topic of hardware, right, VCF also enables me to determine the overall depreciation cost and how that's going to be distributed over time. All I need to do is just to select the depreciation time in the depreciation model. And I can even modify the cost ratio of different infrastructure types like VMC on AWS. I can account for CPU, memory, storage, and even the discounts that I've received during that initial purchase. And actually, on the cluster cost page, I can even get a detailed breakdown of total cost, current utilization, as well as expected utilization of resources like CPU, memory, and even storage. And I even have the option to change how my costs are calculated, right? By either using usable capacity or even by leveraging actual utilization. And the showback feature, right? That can actually be accessed under the capacity drop down and just simply selecting cost. And selecting the showback tab immediately gives me an overview of the costs that are distributed across the organizations that I'm supporting. And I can even select a specific organization and I can see its specific cost. And if that organization has projects, right, I can see the cost of those VMs and the vSphere pods in a group. And with the appropriate tab, I can get insight on month-to-date costs. I can see the most expensive, VMs or the resources in that group. I can see potential savings opportunities as well as trends of that cost over time. And so with this insight, right, you can actually drive transparency and again, that accountability when you're having conversations with the various groups that actually are relying, right, on the services that your infrastructure provides. And then now that we've officially, we've got sort of like that here and now under control, right? With all those features that really sort of help us and manage our costs, right? So now we're at that point where it's time to actually think ahead, right? Because the cheapest way to handle the cost is actually to avoid the cost in the first place, right? And so as you're navigating through this phase, really, to support those strategic investments, taking the money that you're saving and reinvesting it, right? You're gonna need, infrastructure and workload planning tools and even migration capabilities, right, to answer questions related to forecasting capacity needs. You may need to plan for purchases, before you hit a wall, right, and avoid those costly emergency buys. You may need tools that will help you run, what if scenarios, to test moves like shifting from test dev to production or even adding to new projects, right? And also just for, quite frankly, just planning migrations, right? To really understand, the cost and capacity impact, if you will, of moving those workloads between clouds and different data centers, right? And so let's just take a look at a scenario where we're starting a new project. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually get an assessment of my current capacity. And after checking, it appears that I'm going to be running out of capacity here in 109 days. And so let's just see the financial impact of just adding, a new host with our infrastructure planning tool. And as I'm creating this what if scenario, right, I'm specifying the location of my host, complete with the server details, such as the make and the model, the CPU, memory cores, of course, cost, all of that, right? And after running the scenario, VCF immediately displays the results. And in this case, save it about $2,600. That investment is going to extend my CPU and my memory and the capacity for over a year. And of course, this what if scenario can actually be shared with my extended design team for consideration before actually committing to move forward, right, with this addition of the new host to support that new project. And now let's just take a look at a situation where we're going to be onboarding a team that'll need VMs to support their business applications, right? And of course, before I commit to any plans, right, whether we're looking at working within our existing environment or simply by adding new VMs or hosts to existing clusters that are already available, or even if we're considering the option of adding completely new VMs to an entirely new cluster, VCF can actually help us understand the financial impact of additional workloads for both options, and so that we can make a very informed design decision. So let's just walk through that process by creating that scenario where I just described, right? I'm going to specify, a location. I'm going to tell VCF that I want to explore the option of adding a new cluster complete with new servers. And as I'm specifying the details, including the information on the types of servers that I like, I just want to point out that VCF isn't actually creating anything yet, right? I'm simply adding this information for testing purposes, if you will, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish up the scenario by adding some details about the workload, and then I'm going to run the scenario. And in this case, VCF is telling me that this scenario won't work based off the parameters that I provided, but it does provide a recommendation on how to achieve that goal. And I also want to point out that if my scenario did work out, VCF would also tell me if I could accomplish the same scenario for less money. And so with that being said, right, let's just go ahead and adjust my scenario to align with VCS recommendations by simply just increasing the number of servers. Let's just go ahead and take that and let's increase it to 3. And then we're just going to run the scenario again, right? And as you can imagine, the updated workload planning scenario does fit. And VCF also breaks down that cost, right? And what's really, really great about this, right, is that these resorts can also be exported for reporting purposes before I commit to that scenario and actually make this plan real, right? And now let's just take a look at migration planning, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to my planning tool. I'm going to create a new what-if scenario that will allow me to see the cost of moving my workload to 3 different data centers that I'm considering, right? And so as I'm walking through this process, I'm just going to give my process, a name. I'm going to select the data centers that I would like to include in the comparison. And I can configure a new application profile where I can specify the details of my workload, or I can import a specific VM that matches my requirements, such as existing VMs that are already running Linux before actually running the scenario. And as you can imagine, right, cost varies from one data center to another, depending on cost drivers such as the server, facility, power, labor, network license, all that stuff, right? And so the data center comparison feature actually solves that problem by allowing you to select the data center that suits your requirements, it's the least expensive, and of course has adequate capacity, right? And now let's just take a look at this last phase, right? Where I've actually sort of grouped, VCF's chargeback and their billing capabilities, right? So in this phase, obviously, when you're running IT like a business, right, the goal is really to make cost awareness and optimization, part of your everyday operations. So it's not a one-off. This is something that needs to be sort of ingrained in the DNA, right? And so here, you can do a couple of things. You can set rates that reflect your unique cost structure, your business model. You can directly, bill departments or tenants for their usage, and actually just build trust, right? By providing, again, that transparency, by providing that detailed and those transparent cost breakdown, at the organization of the project or even at the VM level, right? And then last but not least, you can actually generate and schedule invoices without manual effort, right? So you can give the tenants clear, itemized billing data that actually matches their resource consumption. And so with that, let's just go ahead and take a look at this workflow in action. And so, the chargeback feature can be accessed under the cost option, under the capacity dropdown. And here you can view tenant information related to things at a high level, right? You can see your chargeback data, including your costs and your VMs. You can see stuff on the organization level. You can see all this great information here. And one of the really great things is that when I click on the organization view, it actually displays a breakdown for each of my organizations and their corresponding region quotas. And then there's a project level view, right, which actually offers a comprehensive view of cost and pricing across the projects within VCF automation with additional insights into associated sort of namespaces and deployments. And the corresponding dashboards and the pricing charts in each one of these views actually makes it easier to track and analyze resource usage and all those costs at every level of your environment. And with that, let's just go ahead now. Let's just talk about billing, right? The billing capability allows you to generate and schedule bills seamlessly for your tenants, right? It transforms the often complex billing process into a streamlined, automated, and even error-free operation that really ensures consistency and accuracy in every transaction, right? And you can do it 2 different ways. First, there is the on-demand billing where the bill is generated manually. It's a guided process where you can enter your start and your end dates. You simply select your billing objects, which can either be an organization or a region quota, and with a simple, quick booyah, your invoice is ready. It's detailed, reflecting the cost of your tenant's resource usage accurately, right? And then for a more automated approach, you can just simply click on schedule bills, right? And this action provides even more efficiency, right? By leveraging Automation Central, where you can set up automated billing generation, right? And so with that, you just simply fill in your base details, you drag and drop your billing objects, and you can set a recurring schedule for automatic billing generation. And so with that, this is sort of like a high level overview of a lot of the features that we've shown and put them in a sort of a FinOps sort of maturity schedule, if you will, so that you can go from each phase and knowing that VCF will help you at each step of that process. And so with that, that concludes the demo. Sachin and Soumya, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can take us home.
Thank you so much, Kelcey. Those were some really insightful demos. Finally, we have this resource page. If you do want to learn more about the capability, we have some really insightful resources we've listed here. Please take a look at those. And finally, like if there are any questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A. We will be happy to answer those. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.